The moonscape was silent, broken only by the hiss of Kai Marrow's respirator and the crunch of his boots on shattered stone. The colony had been dead for decades. No lights, no air, no sound of life, just a graveyard of twisted steel and collapsed towers. For scavengers like him, it was just another husk to pick clean. Kai had spent most of his life crawling through ruins like this. His tools hung from his belt, patched with tape and scavenged parts. His ship was a rust bucket freighter that barely held atmosphere. His stomach growled more often than it was full. The Dominion had made sure of that. They didn't just kill humanity's worlds. They stripped them, blockaded them, starved survivors until desperation drove them to madness. Yet scavengers like Kai kept going. He always told himself it was because he had no choice, but deep down he searched for something more, something that proved humanity hadn't been completely erased. That was what brought him to the collapsed temple. The structure didn't look like much from the outside, just a pile of blackened stone, scorched by plasma fire long ago. But inside, beneath the rubble, he found a stairwell leading down into darkness. His lantern cast weak light against carved walls, glyphs etched with symbols he couldn't read. The air was thin, stale, but somehow still breathable. He pressed deeper, into a chamber choked with dust and silence. At first he thought it was empty. Just more wasted time, more wasted oxygen, but then his lantern flicked across a shape jutting from the cracked stone floor. An object wrapped in cobweb-like fibers, as though time itself had tried to bury it. A sword. Kai frowned. It made no sense. Who carried swords anymore? Even pirates and raiders carried plasma blades or Gauss rifles. But this thing, it didn't look like a relic of warriors. It looked like junk. The blade was corroded, edges chipped, surface eaten by rust. Its grip was bound in leather so old it peeled away like paper. Still, something about it made his chest tighten. He knelt, brushed away the dust, and grasped the hilt. At first it didn't move. Then, with a sound like the exhale of something ancient waking, it slid free of the stone. The chamber lit instantly. Symbols flared to life along the walls, glowing with pale blue fire. The air trembled with a low hum that vibrated in his bones. Kai stumbled back, sword in hand, heart hammering in panic. What the hell? His voice cracked inside his helmet. The sword pulsed faintly, not with electricity, but with something older. Something alive? For a second, he thought he felt another presence behind his eyes, like memories that weren't his whispering fragments of forgotten battles. He staggered, shaking his head. No. He was imagining things. He had to be. But outside the ruins, Dominion scanners awoke. In orbit, patrol ships swerved toward the colony, alarms blazing through their systems. They knew that signature. Every Dominion warlord, every seer and strategist across the galaxy recognized the same impossible truth. The Imperial Blade of Saul had awakened. Kai didn't know the name. He didn't know the history. That the last emperor had carried this weapon into the stars 5 centuries ago, uniting humanity under one banner before vanishing into legend. He didn't know that even the Dominion, who despised humanity, still respected the ancient codes that said the bearer of the blade was not just a leader, but the rightful emperor. All he knew was that his scavenger's life had just ended. The walls continued to hum, casting eerie light across his visor. He considered dropping the sword, running back the way he came, pretending he had never touched it. But the longer he held it, the heavier it felt, not just in weight, but in meaning. His pulse raced, and yet his grip refused to let go. The floor shook violently. Dust rained from the ceiling. Somewhere far above, the colony trembled as engines roared through the sky. Dominion gunships. They were coming fast. Kai bolted for the exit, sword still in his hand, his mind screaming at him to throw it away. But another part of him, the same stubborn spark that had kept him alive through hunger, raids, and war, clung to it like a lifeline. He burst out of the ruins into the ashen light of the dead moon. His freighter sat hidden in a canyon, engines primed for a quick escape. But already he could see streaks of fire in the sky, patrol craft dropping through the thin atmosphere. They weren't after salvage. They were after him. Kai sprinted, lungs burning, heart hammering. He didn't understand why the Dominion suddenly cared about one worthless scavenger. He didn't know that the galaxy had already named him the long-lost Emperor. News traveled faster than any ship. By the time Kai's freighter cleared the colony's orbit, 1,000 whispers had already carried the impossible across the void. The blade has awakened. The Dominion were the first to react. Their fleets moved like a hive, efficient and merciless. On command decks of warships larger than cities, admirals snarled orders. Seers, their minds wrapped in alien circuitry, confirmed the energy surge with perfect clarity. There was no doubt. The weapon long thought lost, the symbol of humanity's old empire, was now in human hands again. And that was dangerous. The Dominion had spent centuries breaking humanity into fragments, ensuring no single leader could rise to unite them. The reappearance of the Imperial blade threatened everything. The Dominion overlords didn't laugh anymore. They planned a hunt. Kai, meanwhile, had no idea. His freighter groaned as it pushed through slipspace, patched engines rattling like bones. His co-pilot, a battered AI core welded into the console, complained about power drains and failing systems. He ignored it. His thoughts kept drifting back to the sword. He had stashed it in a locker, but the hum still echoed in his chest. At moments, he swore he heard voices, like fragments of commands whispered in a language older than he was. It unsettled him, yet part of him couldn't resist opening the locker, staring at it again, trying to make sense of why it felt alive. That was when the ship's scanners howled. A Dominion patrol had locked onto them. Through the viewport, 3 angular frigates appeared, their hulls glowing with alien markings. They cut across his path like predators circling prey. Kai cursed and threw the ship into a desperate spin. The AI core screamed about stress on the frame. Plasma fire streaked across the void, scorching the shields to flickers of blue light. He was outmatched. A scavenger ship couldn't outrun military hunters. He swore under his breath, slamming controls, praying the engines held. But before the frigates could close the trap, another group of ships dropped out of slipspace. Not Dominion. Human. They were ragged, patched-together vessels, smaller than warships, armed with stolen cannons and jury-rigged shields. Rebel craft. Pirates, maybe. Yet instead of attacking Kai, they dove straight at the Dominion patrol. Torpedoes streaked past his freighter. One of the alien frigates exploded in a flash of fire. A voice cut into his comms, sharp and urgent. "Freighter, hold course!" "We've got you," Kai blinked. He didn't know these people. Why would anyone fight Dominion frigates for him? But when the comms opened again, the answer chilled him. "We're here for the blade." His stomach turned cold. Somehow they knew. The rebels tore into the patrol with reckless fury, giving Kai the gap he needed to break free. Plasma scorched across the stars, Dominion hulls shattering under the onslaught. When the battle ended, only debris floated in the void. Kai's ship drifted amid it, smoke trailing from its engines. A docking signal pinged. He hesitated, but he had no choice. His ship was failing. Reluctantly, he let them pull him into the hangar of a rebel cruiser. Inside, armed men and women waited. They weren't soldiers in neat ranks. They wore scavenged armor, mismatched gear, scars etched across their faces. Yet the way they looked at him made his breath catch. Their eyes weren't on him, they were on the sword strapped to his back. An old woman pushed through the crowd. Her body was thin, wires stitched into her skull, her eyes glowing faintly with cybernetic light. She studied him for a long, unblinking moment, then she knelt. The others followed. One by one, the rebels dropped to their knees, heads bowed. Kai froze. "What are you doing?" "You carry the Imperial blade," the woman said softly. "That makes you the Emperor." Kai laughed, a broken sound. "I'm not anyone's Emperor. I'm a scavenger. I didn't even know what this thing was until you told me." Her glowing eyes narrowed. "It doesn't matter what you believe. The galaxy believes it. That's why the Dominion hunts you now. That's why we will fight for you." Before he could protest, alarms blared through the rebel cruiser. Dominion reinforcements had arrived. Dozens of ships this time, closing fast. The rebels rushed to stations. Fighters launched from bays. Kai stumbled after them, still clutching the sword, still trying to deny the truth. Yet when the enemy ships broke through the void, something in him shifted. The sword pulsed against his palm. Words came to his tongue unbidden, orders he didn't plan. Hold the flank. Break left. Lure them into the asteroid belt. The rebel commander froze, staring at him. How did you... But she didn't question. She obeyed. And somehow, impossibly, the rebels survived the ambush. Against overwhelming odds, they fought with precision they'd never shown before, guided by instincts Kai didn't even know he had. When the last Dominion ship burst into fire, the rebels erupted into cheers. They looked at him not as a scavenger, not even as a lucky survivor, but as their emperor. And in that moment, Kai realized with a shiver that he had stepped onto a path he could never escape. The fortress world of Halora was not a world in the traditional sense. It was the shattered moon of a gas giant, its hollowed core turned into a hidden sanctuary. From space, it looked like nothing but rubble, a lifeless scar drifting through rings of ice and stone. But inside its caverns thrummed the last pulse of humanity's war machine. Kai's first glimpse left him speechless. Hangars carved into black rock held squadrons of ships in varying states of repair, some sleek, some barely held together with scrap and prayer. Torchlight flickered across half-melted walls. Generators roared with stolen power cores. Everywhere, humans worked with frantic determination. Engineers welding hulls, medics tending the wounded, pilots sleeping in cockpits because they might be called into battle at any moment. The moment he stepped from the docking ramp, silence rippled through the cavern. Not for him, for the weapon across his back. Heads turned, tools clattered to the floor. People whispered, as if afraid to say it too loudly, "The blade." By the time Kai was ushered into the council chamber, the whispers had spread. Hardened veterans, scarred leaders who had fought 100 losing battles, now looked at him as if he were an answer to prayers too old to remember. Then, in one unified motion, they lowered themselves to one knee. Kai felt his breath stick in his chest. They weren't kneeling to him. They were kneeling to what he carried. He wanted to tell them they were wrong, that he was no savior, just a scavenger who got lucky. But their eyes burned with something he hadn't seen in years. Hope. And he couldn't bring himself to take it away. From that day, he was no longer an outsider. Fleets that once refused to cooperate began sending envoys. Old rivalries that had splintered humanity after Earth's fall were set aside. Pirates pledged allegiance, mercenaries joined ranks, colonies sent supplies and soldiers. The movement spread faster than the Dominion could suppress. Humanity was uniting again, not under a government or council, but under a myth reborn. Kai hated the weight of it. He spent hours in training chambers, forcing himself to catch up to the expectations pressing down on him. Veterans schooled him in fleet maneuvers, strategy, and the intricacies of command. He had no right to keep up with them, yet somehow he did. The knowledge flowed through him like water through stone grooves, as if his blood already knew what his mind had forgotten. Sword practice was the same. At first he swung clumsily, relying on brute instinct. But the weapon corrected him. His arms moved with patterns he didn't understand, countering strikes before they landed, cutting through impossible defenses. Each time the blade connected, it pulsed with a resonance that echoed in his bones. It terrified him, because the more he used it, the less he felt like himself, but there was no time for fear. The Dominion, enraged by the loss at Narvos Rift, moved swiftly. Scouts returned with grim reports. A fleet was converging on Halora. It wasn't a raid. It was extermination. When the alarms blared, the fortress erupted into action. Ships scrambled from the hangars. Fighters streaked into orbit. Commanders barked orders as civilians rushed to bunkers deep within the moon's core. The atmosphere trembled with anticipation, dread, and raw defiance. Kai stood at the center of the storm on the command deck of the flagship Iron Resolve. He had never commanded anything larger than a freighter, but now thousands of lives waited for his word. His hand tightened on the hilt of the blade, and as the Dominion fleet emerged from slipspace, visions tore through his mind. Formations, attack angles, counters to maneuvers that hadn't even begun. He gave the orders. His voice was steady, though his heart thundered in his chest. The battle erupted with fire and fury. Human ships darted like knives between the hulking dreadnoughts, striking from impossible angles. Dominion lines folded inward, dragged exactly where Kai had foreseen. Asteroid fields became traps, debris clouds became cover, weak fleets became sudden hammers. For hours the fight raged, neither side relenting. By all logic, humanity should have been annihilated. Yet the Dominion found themselves bleeding ships. Their commanders hesitated, unnerved by the precision of the rebels. Against all odds, Kai's fractured fleet destroyed a third of the enemy before driving the rest into retreat. When the last Dominion cruiser exploded in a blossom of fire, the humans cheered so loud it shook the command deck. Pilots wept in their cockpits. Ground crews embraced in the hangars. After generations of loss, they had taken back a sliver of the stars. Kai, however, stood in stunned silence. He felt the weight of every life lost, every ship burning in the void, every man and woman who had thrown themselves into the fight because they believed in him. He had given them victory, but he knew it wasn't just his doing. The blade was steering him, shaping him into something more than he had ever wanted to be. He wasn't just a scavenger anymore. Whether he liked it or not, he was becoming the emperor they needed. And as the cheers echoed through Halora, he realized something that chilled him to the core. The Dominion would never allow this rebellion to grow. The real war hadn't even begun. The victory at Narvos Rift sent shockwaves across the galaxy. For humanity, it was a spark of hope. For the Dominion, it was an insult that could not stand. They did not send another patrol fleet. They did not send another general. They gathered an armada. The first warnings reached Halora through smugglers and intercepted transmissions. Entire sectors reported the sky turning black with Dominion warships. Dozens of dreadnoughts, each one a fortress the size of a continent. Carriers vomiting endless waves of fighters. Planet crushers, weapons designed to burn worlds into glass. At the heart of the invasion was their supreme overlord, Vathar the Unbroken. Legends painted him as immortal, clad in armor forged from the bones of species he had annihilated. No one knew how many centuries he had ruled, only that wherever he marched, civilizations ended. For humanity, he was not just an enemy. He was the shadow that had haunted their extinction for generations, and now he was coming for Kai. The fortress world shook with preparation. Workers welded armor plates onto ships until their hands bled. Children carried munitions into the hangars. Soldiers wrote their names onto the sides of torpedoes, knowing they'd likely never return. Every human alive on Halora understood the stakes. This was not just another battle. This was survival itself. Kai walked through the hangars, the blade at his hip, watching men and women prepare to die for him. It made his stomach turn. He didn't feel like a leader. He felt like a thief, holding a crown that didn't belong to him. But the way the soldiers looked at him kept him standing tall. They didn't see a scavenger. They saw an emperor. When the Dominion arrived, the stars vanished. The human fleet rose from Halora like insects against a hurricane. At once, the void filled with fire. Fighters tore into each other like swarms of sparks, their trails crisscrossing the darkness. Cannons thundered, beams ripped through shields, whole cruisers shattered into flaming debris. Kai sat on the command deck, every sense burning. The blade pulsed like a second heartbeat, flooding his mind with visions, attacks before they came, enemy formations before they appeared. He gave orders with clarity that stunned even him. Break right flank. Pull carriers into the shadow of the moon. Redirect Strike Group 6 through Debris Corridor Bravo. Ships obeyed. Human squadrons moved like they had trained together their whole lives. They struck with precision, crippling Dominion lines, carving open gaps where none should exist. But victory was a word that had no place in this battle. For every Dominion ship destroyed, 10 more loomed from slip space. Human vessels fell like stars ripped from the heavens. Cruisers split in half, spilling fire and bodies into the void. The Dominion fleet was endless, tireless, merciless. Kai refused to sit idle. When boarding alarms blared, he grabbed the blade and plunged into the fight himself. Dominion shock troopers stormed the decks, monstrous beings clad in exosuits that spat plasma fire. Kai's crew fell around him, but when the blade ignited in his hands, the tide turned. The rusty sword shone with ancient light, cutting through alien steel as though it were cloth. Plasma blasts deflected against its edge. Every swing carried a weight not his own, as if the voices of humanity guided his arm. But the cost grew heavier with every strike. His comrades screamed and fell. Ships burned around him. Each victory felt smaller, swallowed by the endless tide. By the third day of fighting, Halora itself trembled. Orbital bombardments scarred its surface, carving cities into firestorms. Civilians huddled in bunkers, praying to names long forgotten. The Dominion wanted more than conquest. They wanted obliteration. Kai felt it breaking him. He wasn't a god. He couldn't save everyone. Every order he gave killed people as much as it saved them. His dreams were filled with the faces of the dead, soldiers who had believed in him, only to vanish into flame. Yet when he faltered, when despair threatened to swallow him whole, he looked out across the command deck and saw his people still fighting. Exhausted pilots dove into hopeless dogfights. Soldiers dragged wounded comrades back to the lines. Children in the bunkers sang old Earth songs to keep their courage. They were fighting not just for him. They were fighting for each other. That truth steadied him. And so, when Vathar himself appeared at the forefront of the Eternal Maw, his colossal flagship blotting out the sun, Kai knew there was no retreat. The final confrontation had begun. The Dominion's retaliation came with the fury of a collapsing star. Scouts brought warnings too late. By the time Halora's scattered fleet detected the incoming signatures, the enemy was already at their throats. Hundreds of warships tore from slipspace in disciplined formations, their hulls glowing with the crimson emblems of Dominion warlords. This was no surgical strike. It was annihilation. The first salvo shattered the moon's outer defenses. Towers of plasma fire lanced across the surface, vaporizing hangars, ripping through fortifications, and hurling men and women into the void. The cavernous stronghold that had once seemed unbreakable trembled like brittle glass. Kai stood on the Iron Resolve's bridge, watching entire sections of the fortress collapse into flame. His gut twisted. He had seen destruction before, scavenged wreckage after battles, but this was different. This was deliberate slaughter. "Evacuate the civilians," he ordered, voice rough but steady. "Every shuttle, every freighter, we buy them time." Humanity's ragtag fleet launched like a swarm of hornets, darting at the massive warships with reckless courage. Tiny corvettes tore across the Dominion's lines, targeting engines and weak points. Many were obliterated instantly, reduced to sparks against the armored giants. But each sacrifice bought another moment for evacuation ships to escape the burning moon. Kai's mind thrummed with visions again. Patterns. Maneuvers, moves that could turn chaos into survival. He barked orders, his fleet twisting into impossible arcs, breaking Dominion formations, striking from angles their enemies hadn't considered. For every human ship destroyed, a Dominion cruiser went dark in return. But the numbers were against them. The battle raged like a storm of metal and fire. Explosions lit the void, casting shadows across Kai's determined face. His hands never left the blade. He wasn't holding it to fight with. It was seated at his side, glowing faintly, whispering through his veins. With it, he saw more than tactics. He felt the pulse of the battle itself, as if every human life was a spark tied to his own. But with that bond came the pain. Each pilot who died hit him like a hammer. Each ship torn apart was a piece of him shattering. Then came the Dominion flagship. It emerged from the void like a leviathan, bristling with weapons, its silhouette blotting out stars. On its prow gleamed the insignia of the Dominion's High Marshal, a being whose name carried terror across half the galaxy. This was the message. Not only would the rebellion be crushed, but its so-called emperor would be erased. Kai's fleet reeled under the flagship's barrage. Beams of energy ripped through his lines, reducing destroyers to dust. Panic rippled through the comms. Some captains begged for retreat, others for guidance. Kai closed his eyes, and the visions came sharper than ever. Not mere tactics, but destinies. He saw paths branching, futures splitting. In most, humanity burned. In a few, slim and fragile, they endured. "Target the flagship," Kai ordered. His voice carried an authority that silenced every channel. "All squadrons converge." "We cut off the Serpent's head. It was suicide." But they obeyed. Human ships dove toward the Leviathan. Fighters swarmed its flanks, blasting at turrets. Frigates rammed its shields to overload them. A cruiser detonated its core in a blinding explosion, tearing open a wound in the flagship's side. One by one, humans sacrificed themselves to drag the monster down. The iron resolve led the charge, cutting through fire that should have vaporized them. The flagship loomed larger and larger, its guns tearing chunks from the human fleet. Kai rose from the command chair. He strapped the blade to his back and spoke calmly. "I'm going." His officers tried to stop him, but he was already moving. A strike team launched in a shuttle, weaving through debris, slipping into the gaping wound of the Dominion flagship. The halls within were burning, but still guarded by towering alien soldiers clad in obsidian armor. Kai fought with feral precision. The blade sang through the air, its edge carving through armor as if it were paper. Every strike unleashed echoes of the forgotten emperor, each movement guided by instincts not his own. His team followed, stunned, carving a path toward the flagship's core. At last they reached it, a pulsating reactor encased in a cathedral of steel. Dominion warriors swarmed to defend it. The battle was brutal, close, personal. Blood and sparks sprayed the walls. Men screamed, died, and still fought on. Kai's body burned with exhaustion, but the blade dragged him further. His final strike split the reactor housing. Energy screamed like a wounded beast. The team ran. Kai stayed. He pressed his hand to the core, blade in the other, forcing the weapon's strange energy into the reactor. Through the comms, his voice thundered, "Now you run!" Humanity must live. The flagship exploded. Light brighter than a sun tore across the battlefield. Human ships fled, battered and broken but alive. When the fire faded, the Dominion fleet was in ruins. Their High Marshal was dead, but so was Kai, or so they believed. As survivors limped to safety, whispers spread again. Not only had they escaped, not only had they destroyed the enemy's strongest weapon, but their emperor had given his life to buy it. And sometimes, a martyr was more dangerous to tyrants than a living king. The Dominion's defeat at Halora echoed like thunder across the galaxy. For the first time in centuries, humanity had stood against their masters and lived. Refugees whispered of victory, of ships surviving the impossible, of a leader wielding a weapon out of legend. But above all, they whispered of sacrifice. Kai was gone, consumed in the explosion that destroyed the Dominion's flagship. His name became a rallying cry. Whole colonies painted the blade's sigil on their walls. Pirate clans who once preyed on refugees now swore vengeance against the Dominion. Even alien species enslaved under Dominion rule heard the rumor. The lost emperor had returned and had died to light the fire of rebellion. Humanity united as never before. Fleet yards that had been idle for generations now blazed with forges. Every scavenger's workshop turned into a shipwright's bay. Broken families volunteered their children to fight. Across the stars, an army rose not out of discipline, but out of fury and hope. The Dominion reeled. Their governors tightened control, cracking down on whispers, executing anyone who dared speak of the Blade Emperor. But fear spread even within their own ranks. If one forgotten people could wound them so deeply, what of the others? For the first time, cracks appeared in their endless empire. And then came the storm. 3 months after Halora, the Dominion unleashed a war campaign that dwarfed anything before it. Entire sectors burned. Colonies that had sworn to humanity's cause were erased. Every victory Kai had bought threatened to collapse under the sheer weight of Dominion might. Humanity's fleets fought like wolves, but without their leader, coordination faltered. Losses piled higher than they could afford. It was then, at the moment of collapse, that the impossible happened. A signal crackled through subspace, carried on every human frequency. Grainy, distorted, but unmistakable. "This fight is not over," the voice was Kai's. Shock paralyzed the fleet. On every ship, men and women froze at their stations, staring in disbelief. Then the signal cleared. A transmission appeared. Kai, scarred and pale but alive, standing in the ruins of a Dominion facility. The blade hung at his side, pulsing faintly. "I was taken," he said, voice raw. "Dragged into their depths. But they could not kill me. The blade would not let them. They called me prisoner, but they gave me time, and in that time I learned. I saw the truth of what they fear most, us, united." They thought Halora was an end. It was only the beginning. The galaxy erupted. What had been hope turned into certainty. Their emperor was alive. In the days that followed, Kai resurfaced not as a fugitive, but as a commander. He appeared at the head of daring strikes, leading raids into Dominion space with precision too uncanny to resist. He struck supply convoys, freed slave worlds, assassinated governors. With each victory, his legend grew. But Kai himself was changing. The visions came faster, sharper. Sometimes when he closed his eyes, he saw not just battles, but the faces of men centuries dead, emperors past, generals long forgotten, their voices overlapping with his own. The blade was not a weapon. It was a crown, binding him to something larger than himself. The final battle came at Veyros, a fortress world ringed with fortifications and defended by the last true Dominion armada. If humanity could break it, they would carve a permanent home in the stars. If they failed, their rebellion would scatter, hunted to extinction. Kai's fleet surged into the system, engines blazing like comets. Thousands of ships filled the void, a patchwork of humanity's desperation, warships, freighters, even armed civilian transports. Across from them loomed the Dominion's might, endless lines of disciplined dreadnoughts. Silence reigned for a heartbeat. Then Kai's voice rang across every channel. Humanity has always been underestimated. We are the weak, the scattered, the forgotten. But today, they will learn what it means when we stand together. The fleets collided. The battle was apocalyptic. Hulls split, planet-side defenses rained fire, fighters tore through clouds of debris. Kai's visions guided him, his fleet weaving like a living thing, striking blows where none should have been possible. The Dominion fought with merciless discipline. But for every ship they destroyed, humanity threw 2 more at them. At the battle's height, Kai boarded the Dominion's command fortress with a strike team. Hallways ran red with blood, alien and human alike. He fought his way to the heart, the blade burning with light too bright to look at. There, he faced the regent of the Dominion, a creature older than nations, armored in obsidian, wielding a staff crackling with energy. The duel shook the fortress. The regent struck with the fury of an empire, but Kai answered with every ghost of his lineage. Every memory etched into the blade. Sparks lit the chamber, steel screamed against energy, until at last Kai drove the blade through the regent's chest. The Dominion flagship faltered. Their fleets, leaderless, broke. Humanity's forces surged forward, driving them into retreat. When the battle ended, Veyros was ash. Humanity had won not just a fight, but a future. On the burning steps of the fortress, Kai stood before his soldiers. His armor was cracked, his body broken, but the blade still glowed. "I was a scavenger," he said. "I was nothing. But when I picked up this sword, I remembered who we are. Not slaves, not prey. We are human. And no empire will ever forget that again." The cheers shook the stars. The Dominion still existed, vast and dangerous, but their illusion of invincibility was gone. Humanity had proven they could bleed them. They had proven they could win, and at the center of it all stood Kai, not a scavenger anymore, not even just a leader, but the Emperor reborn.